The blazing Arizona sun had just begun to dip behind the jagged mountains when Dahlia Patterson stumbled into Riverton with nothing but the clothes on her back, a small leather pouch clutched in her trembling hand, and a brand burned into her reputation that would follow her like a shadow. The year was 1878, and the frontier town of Riverton, Arizona, was no place for a woman alone, especially one marked as a thief. Blood trickled down Dahlia's temple as she made her way down the dusty main street. 3 days of hard travel had left her boots worn thin, her once fine blue dress tattered and caked with desert dust. She'd fled Silver Creek in the dead of night after narrowly escaping a mob intent on seeing her hang for a crime she didn't commit. 22 years of life hadn't prepared her for becoming the most hated woman in the territory. "Water," she whispered, her throat so parched the word barely escaped. The general store's porch looked inviting, but the stares of the men lounging outside turned cold as they took in her disheveled appearance. Dahlia lowered her gaze, clutching the small pouch containing her mother's wedding ring, the only thing of value she had left in the world. "Ain't you that Patterson girl?" one of the men called out. "Heard tell you robbed the Silver Creek Bank and shot old man Wilson." Dahlia's heart hammered in her chest. News traveled fast in the territory. "I didn't," she managed to say, but her protest was lost in the rising murmurs of the gathering crowd. "We don't take kindly to thieves in Riverton," a woman spat, stepping forward with narrowed eyes. "Especially ones with blood on their hands." "I never stole anything," Dahlia said, her voice stronger now despite her exhaustion. "And I certainly never shot anyone. It was Jasper Reynolds who—" "Save your lies," the woman interrupted. "My cousin works at the Silver Creek Telegraph office. They've been sending word all across the territory. $500 reward for the capture of Dahlia Patterson, bank robber and murderer." The crowd pressed closer, and Dahlia took a stumbling step backward. Her vision swam with exhaustion and fear. She'd been running for days, barely stopping to rest, desperate to put distance between herself and the false accusations. But it seemed her reputation had outrun her. "I'm innocent," she whispered, though she knew it was futile. A man grabbed her arm roughly. "Sheriff'll want to see you." "I say we save the sheriff the trouble," another voice called out. "Tree at the edge of town'll do just fine." Dahlia felt the blood drain from her face as panic set in. This couldn't be happening. Not again. She'd barely escaped Silver Creek with her life after Jasper Reynolds, her former employer, and the man who had proposed marriage to her just weeks before had framed her for his own crimes. "That's enough." The deep voice cut through the hostile murmurs of the crowd like a knife. The grip on Dahlia's arm loosened as the townspeople turned toward the source of the command. Dahlia lifted her gaze to see a tall figure on horseback, silhouetted against the setting sun. The crowd parted as the rider guided his chestnut stallion forward. Dust swirled around the horse's hooves as he came to a stop just feet from where Dahlia stood trembling. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jangling as his boots hit the dirt. He wore a dark Stetson pulled low over his eyes and a well-worn leather vest over a blue shirt. A star-shaped badge glinted on his chest. "I said that's enough," he repeated, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "This isn't Silver Creek, and we don't condemn folks without a fair hearing." "But Sheriff Vaughn, she's wanted," someone began. "I know exactly who she is," Sheriff Vaughn Zachary replied, his eyes finally meeting Dahlia's. They were a startling blue, like the sky just before twilight, and they held something that made Dahlia's breath catch, not contempt or suspicion, but something she couldn't quite name. "And she'll get a fair hearing in my town." He turned to address the crowd. "Go on home, all of you. If there's justice to be served, it'll be served properly." Reluctantly, the townspeople began to disperse, though not without dark mutters and backward glances. Sheriff Zachary turned to Dahlia, his expression unreadable. "Miss Patterson, I presume?" Dahlia nodded, not trusting her voice. Now that the immediate threat of the mob had passed, she felt her knees weakening beneath her. 3 days without proper food or rest, coupled with the terror of being recognized, had taken their toll, the sheriff seemed to notice. "When's the last time you ate?" Dahlia swallowed hard. "Yesterday morning, some berries I found along the trail." Something flickered in his eyes, concern, perhaps. "Come with me." It wasn't a request. Dahlia hesitated, glancing down the road that led out of town. She could run again, but to where? And in her condition, she wouldn't make it far. "I didn't do it," she said softly. "Any of it." Sheriff Zachary studied her for a long moment. "Maybe not," he finally said, "but you're about to collapse where you stand, and that won't help your case either way." He held out his hand. "I'm not taking you to a cell, not yet anyway." Against her better judgment, Dahlia placed her trembling hand in his. His palm was calloused but warm, and his grip gentle as he led her toward his horse. "Can you ride?" he asked, and when she nodded, he helped her up into the saddle before mounting behind her. The solid warmth of his chest against her back was the first comfort she'd felt in days. As they rode slowly down the street, Dahlia felt the stares of the townspeople burning into her back. She was used to it by now, the suspicion, the hatred. But what she couldn't understand was why this sheriff, this stranger, was showing her a kindness no one else had offered since the accusations began. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the clip-clop of the horse's hooves. She felt rather than saw his shrug. "I've been a lawman long enough to know that wanted posters don't always tell the full story." He paused. "And I've never known a bank robber to travel with nothing but the clothes on her back and what I'm guessing is a family keepsake in that pouch." Dahlia's hand instinctively tightened around the small leather pouch. "It was my mother's ring, the only thing I have left of her." They rode in silence for a moment before he spoke again. "For what it's worth, Miss Patterson, in my arms you'll only know honor. I'll see you get a fair hearing, whatever the truth may be." Something about the simple promise, spoken without fanfare, brought tears to Dahlia's eyes. She blinked them away quickly. She'd learned the hard way not to trust easily, especially men with kind words and positions of power. But as the sheriff guided his horse toward a modest house at the edge of town, Dahlia allowed herself the smallest flicker of hope. Perhaps here, in this dusty frontier town, she might finally have a chance to clear her name. She had no way of knowing that Sheriff Vaughn Zachary would soon become not just her protector, but the man who would help her reclaim her life and in the process, steal her heart. Sheriff Zachary's home was modest but clean, with simple furnishings that spoke of a man who valued function over form. A well-worn leather armchair sat beside a small fireplace, a bookshelf filled with dime novels and law books against one wall, and a sturdy oak table in the kitchen area. "Sit," he instructed, gesturing to a chair at the table. "I'll fix something to eat." Dahlia sank gratefully into the chair, her legs finally giving way beneath her. She watched warily as the sheriff moved around the small kitchen, pulling out a loaf of bread, some dried beef, and a jar of preserves. "It's not much," he said apologetically as he set the food before her along with a cup of water. "I wasn't expecting company." Dahlia stared at the simple meal, suddenly overwhelmed by the sheriff's unexpected kindness. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice cracking slightly. She took a small bite of bread, trying to eat slowly despite her ravenous hunger. Sheriff Zachary sat across from her, removing his hat to reveal thick dark hair with just a touch of silver at the temples. Up close, Dahlia could see he was older than she'd first thought, perhaps in his early 30s, with lines around his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun, and a small scar that cut through his right eyebrow. "You should know," he said, his voice low and serious, "that I've received telegrams about you. The charges in Silver Creek are serious." Dahlia set down the bread, her appetite suddenly diminished. "They're false, every one of them." "Tell me what happened then." Dahlia hesitated, uncertain whether to trust him, but what choice did she have? "I was working as a bookkeeper at the Silver Creek Bank. I'm good with numbers, my father taught me before he died." She twisted her hands in her lap. "The bank manager, Jasper Reynolds, took an interest in me. Started courting me, asked me to marry him. She glanced up to find the sheriff watching her intently, his expression unreadable. I accepted his proposal, I thought. She shook her head, angry at her own naivety. I thought he loved me, but then I found discrepancies in the accounts. Money was missing significant amounts. When I confronted Jasper, he laughed, said I was too smart for my own good. Dahlia took a shaky breath. He'd been embezzling from the bank for months, and he'd set it up to look like I was responsible. My signature was on documents I'd never seen, ledgers were altered. When Mr. Wilson, the bank owner, started asking questions, Jasper shot him and blamed me. And you ran, Sheriff Zachary concluded. What choice did I have? Jasper had everyone convinced of my guilt before I even knew what was happening. The town turned against me in an instant. Dahlia's hands trembled as she reached for the water. Mr. Wilson survived, thank God, but he was unconscious when I fled. I don't know if he's awake now, if he's told them the truth. The sheriff was silent for a long moment. Then he asked, "Do you have any proof? Anything that might support your story?" Dahlia shook her head miserably. "Only my word against his." And Jasper Reynolds comes from one of the wealthiest families in the territory. His father practically built Silver Creek. She met the sheriff's gaze directly. I know how this sounds. Every criminal claims they're innocent. To her surprise, Sheriff Zachary's lips quirked into a slight smile. Not every criminal. Most are surprisingly forthright about their misdeeds, in my experience. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. But let's say I believe you. What do you plan to do now? The question caught Dahlia off guard. She hadn't thought beyond escape, beyond putting distance between herself and Silver Creek. I don't know, she admitted. Keep running, I suppose, until I can somehow prove my innocence. The sheriff shook his head. Running makes you look guilty, and sooner or later they'll catch up to you. Then what would you suggest? Dahlia asked, a hint of desperation creeping into her voice. Turn myself in to be hanged for crimes I didn't commit. No, Sheriff Zachary said firmly. I suggest you stay here in Riverton, under my protection. Dahlia stared at him in disbelief. Why would you do that? You don't even know me. I know enough, he replied. And I know that justice matters to me. If you're innocent and my instincts tell me you are, then you deserve a chance to clear your name. He hesitated, then added, besides, I could use some help around the office. My deputy left last month to try his luck in the gold fields up north. You're offering me a job? Dahlia couldn't keep the astonishment from her voice. Consider it a temporary arrangement. You said you're good with numbers, the town's accounts are a mess. A hint of humor glinted in his blue eyes, and it's easier to keep an eye on you if you're working alongside me. The townspeople will never accept it. You saw how they reacted to me. Let me worry about that. The sheriff rose from his chair. For tonight, you can sleep here. I'll take the chair. When Dahlia began to protest, he raised a hand. I've slept in worse conditions, Miss Patterson. Consider it part of my duty to ensure the safety of everyone in my jurisdiction, even suspected bank robbers. Despite everything, Dahlia felt a smile tug at her lips. I think under the circumstances, you might as well call me Dahlia. Something warm flickered in Sheriff Zachary's eyes. Vaughn, he offered in return, at least when it's just us. That night, as Dahlia lay in the sheriff's bed, the first real bed she'd slept in for days, she tried to make sense of her situation. She was still wanted, still in danger, still carrying the burden of false accusations. But for the first time since fleeing Silver Creek, she didn't feel entirely alone. Sheriff Vaughn Zachary had offered her something no one else had a chance. Whether it was foolish to trust him remained to be seen. But as exhaustion finally claimed her, Dahlia found herself hoping that in this dusty corner of Arizona, she might have found an ally in her fight to reclaim her life and her honor. Dahlia awoke to the aroma of coffee and the sound of sizzling bacon. For a moment, she lay disoriented, confused by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back: her arrival in Riverton, the hostile crowd, and Sheriff Zachary's unexpected intervention. She sat up slowly, wincing at her stiff muscles. Despite the comfortable bed, her body still ached from days of hard travel. Sunlight streamed through the window, suggesting it was well into the morning. She couldn't remember the last time she'd slept so deeply or for so long. Smoothing her tangled hair as best she could and straightening her wrinkled dress, Dahlia made her way out to the main room. Sheriff Zachary stood at the small stove, his back to her. He'd removed his vest and his blue shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, revealing tanned, muscular forearms. "Good morning," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned, and Dahlia was struck again by the intensity of his blue eyes. "Morning," he replied with a slight nod. "Hope you're hungry." "Famished," she admitted, "but you didn't have to cook for me." A hint of a smile played at his lips. "Consider it hospitality. We might be a small town, but we have our manners." He motioned toward the table, which was already set with 2 plates. "Sit. Coffee's hot." Dahlia did as instructed, accepting the cup of coffee he poured her gratefully. The warm, bitter liquid was exactly what she needed to fully wake up. "I brought something for you," Vaughn said, setting a plate of bacon and eggs before her. He gestured to a bundle on a chair. "Some clothes. They belonged to my sister before she moved back east. Should be close to your size." Dahlia stared at the bundle, then back at the sheriff. "Your sister, Rebecca." His expression softened slightly. "She couldn't take to frontier life, moved to Philadelphia 3 years ago to teach school." "That was thoughtful of you," Dahlia said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "Thank you." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Vaughn spoke again. "I need to head to the office. When you're ready, you can change and meet me there." He hesitated. "People are going to talk, they already are, but stay close to me and no one will bother you." "You're still going through with having me work with you?" Dahlia asked, surprised that he hadn't reconsidered in the light of day. "I keep my word, Miss Patterson." His tone was matter of fact. "Besides, the town accounts won't organize themselves." After he left, Dahlia examined the clothes he'd provided: a simple but well-made blue calico dress, a shawl, and sturdy boots that were only slightly too large. The dress was a bit loose in places, but infinitely better than her current tattered garment. Clean and newly dressed, Dahlia felt more like herself than she had in days. She tucked her mother's ring securely in the pocket of her new dress and steeled herself for what lay ahead. The town of Riverton had made its initial judgment of her clear. Only time would tell if she could change their minds or if Sheriff Zachary's protection would be enough to keep her safe. The sheriff's office was a squat, sturdy building in the center of town, with a small jail attached to the back. Dahlia could feel eyes on her as she walked down the main street, could hear the whispers that followed in her wake. She kept her head high, though her heart pounded in her chest. When she reached the office, she hesitated before pushing open the door. Inside, Vaughn sat at a large desk covered in papers. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression shifted, a momentary softening that was gone so quickly Dahlia wondered if she'd imagined it. "Those fit you well enough," he observed, standing. "Feel better?" "Much," Dahlia replied. "Thank you again." He nodded toward a smaller desk in the corner. "That's yours. I've pulled the town ledgers. They're a mess. The previous deputy had many talents, but bookkeeping wasn't among them." Dahlia moved to the desk, surveying the stack of ledgers with an experienced eye. "I'll sort them out, I have no doubt." There was that hint of a smile again. "I need to make my rounds. Will you be all right here alone?" The question carried more weight than its simple words. Would she be safe? Would she still be here when he returned? Would she honor the trust he was placing in her? "I'll be fine," she assured him. "I have work to do." After Vaughn left, Dahlia immersed herself in the ledgers. They were indeed a mess: entries missing, numbers that didn't add up, expenses recorded without explanation. But there was a certain comfort in the familiar work, in the orderly world of numbers where everything eventually balanced if you found the right equation. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice the door open until a shadow fell across her desk. Looking up, she found herself face to face with a stern-faced older woman whose pinched expression made it clear she wasn't paying a friendly visit. "So it's true," the woman said, her voice sharp with disapproval. Sheriff Zachary is harboring a criminal. Dahlia set down her pencil carefully. I'm helping the sheriff organize the town records, madam. Is that what they're calling it? The woman's gaze swept over Dahlia with undisguised contempt. I'm Meredith Campbell. My husband is mayor of Riverton. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Campbell, Dahlia said politely, though she doubted the sentiment was mutual. I can't imagine what Vaughn is thinking, Mrs. Campbell continued as if Dahlia hadn't spoken. But rest assured, the town council will have something to say about this arrangement. We don't need your kind bringing trouble to our doorstep. Dahlia felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice level. I understand your concern, Mrs. Campbell, but I'm innocent of the charges against me, and Sheriff Zachary has graciously offered me the chance to prove it. Gracious indeed, Mrs. Campbell replied with a sniff. Well, I've said my piece. Don't get too comfortable, Miss Patterson. Your stay in Riverton will be short-lived if I have anything to say about it. After the door closed behind Mrs. Campbell, Dahlia released a shaky breath. This was only the beginning, she knew. The people of Riverton had already judged and condemned her based on rumors and wanted posters. Changing their minds would be no small feat. When Vaughn returned an hour later, he seemed to sense something was wrong immediately. What happened? He asked, setting his hat on a hook by the door. Mrs. Campbell paid me a visit, Dahlia replied, trying to keep her tone light. She wanted to make it clear that the mayor doesn't approve of your newest employee. Vaughn's jaw tightened. Meredith Campbell has opinions on everything that happens in this town. He moved to stand beside Dahlia's desk. Don't let her bother you. It's not just her, Dahlia said quietly. It's everyone. They look at me and see a thief and a murderer. She met his gaze directly. Why don't you? The question hung in the air between them. Vaughn was silent for a long moment, his blue eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. I've been a lawman for 12 years, he finally said. I've seen real killers, real thieves, and I've seen innocent people railroaded by circumstance or malice. He leaned against the edge of her desk. Something about your story rings true. And until I have reason to think otherwise, I'm inclined to give you the benefit of the doubt. That's a dangerous policy for a sheriff, Dahlia observed, though she couldn't help the small smile that curved her lips. Perhaps. He straightened up. But I've found my instincts are usually good. Now, how are those ledgers coming along? As days turned into a week, Dahlia fell into a routine in Riverton. She spent her days in the sheriff's office, bringing order to the town's financial records, occasionally helping Vaughn with correspondence or other paperwork. In the evenings, she returned with him to his small house, where they shared simple meals and quiet conversation. The townspeople remained wary, some openly hostile. But Vaughn's presence beside her acted as a shield, his quiet authority keeping the worst of their suspicion at bay. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. The baker stopped turning his back when she entered his shop. The dressmaker offered a hesitant good morning when they passed on the street. Small gestures, but meaningful nonetheless. It was during her second week in Riverton that the trouble started. Dahlia was alone in the office, Vaughn having ridden out to investigate reports of cattle rustling at her ranch several miles outside town. The door swung open, and Dahlia looked up expecting to see Mrs. Whitaker, who had begun stopping by with occasional baked goods, a sign that at least one of the townspeople was warming to her. Instead, 3 men stood in the doorway, their expressions hard. Dahlia recognized them as regulars at the saloon across the street. She'd seen them watching her through the windows when she passed, their gazes following her like predators tracking prey. Well, the tallest of the 3 drawled, stepping into the office. If it ain't the little thief playing at being respectable. Dahlia rose from her desk, her heart hammering. Sheriff Zachary isn't here, she said, keeping her voice steady. If you have business with the law, you'll need to come back later. The second man, heavy-set with a scraggly beard, chuckled. Our business is with you, darlin'. See, we got to thinking there's a mighty fine reward for turning you in. $500, added the third, a wiry man with a pockmarked face. That's a lot of money just for handing over one little lady. Sheriff Zachary has granted me sanctuary while I clear my name, Dahlia said, though she knew the words were unlikely to sway them. Any attempt to remove me from Riverton would be against his authority. Sheriff ain't here, the tall one said, moving closer. And what he don't know won't hurt him. By the time he gets back, we'll be halfway to Silver Creek. Dahlia's eyes darted to Vaughn's desk, where she knew he kept a pistol in the top drawer, but the men stood between her and it, blocking her path. This doesn't have to get ugly, the heavy-set man said, his tone falsely pleasant. You come along nice and quiet, we'll treat you real gentle-like. I'm not going anywhere with you, Dahlia replied, her voice stronger than she felt. She backed away, putting the desk between them and herself. The tall man's face darkened. Ain't giving you a choice, girl. He lunged forward, reaching across the desk for her. Dahlia reacted instinctively, grabbing the heavy ledger book and swinging it with all her might. It connected with his face with a solid thud, sending him staggering backward with a howl of pain. The other two men rushed forward. Dahlia scrambled away, but the wiry one caught her arm in a bruising grip. She struggled, kicking at him, but the heavy-set man grabbed her other arm, effectively immobilizing her. You're going to regret that, the tall one snarled, blood streaming from his nose. He drew back his hand to strike her. The crack of a gunshot froze everyone in place. All eyes turned to the doorway where Vaughn stood, his pistol raised, his expression thunderous. Let her go, he commanded, his voice low and dangerous. Now. The men exchanged glances but didn't release Dahlia. Now, Sheriff, the heavy-set one began, we're just claiming the reward money that's rightfully a second shot, this one embedding itself in the floorboard near the man's foot, cut off his words. That wasn't a request, Vaughn said coldly. Release her and step away, or the next bullet finds a more permanent home. This time they obeyed, letting go of Dahlia's arms and backing away. She immediately moved toward Vaughn, her legs shaky with relief. Jed, you and your friends have exactly 1 minute to get out of my office and out of my sight, Vaughn continued, his pistol still trained on them. And if I ever catch you putting hands on Miss Patterson again, the undertaker will be measuring you for pine boxes. Am I clear? The men muttered begrudging agreements as they edged toward the door. The tall one, Jed, paused beside Vaughn. This ain't over, Sheriff. That woman's wanted. You can't protect her forever. Try me, Vaughn replied, his voice deadly quiet. Once they were gone, Vaughn holstered his pistol and turned to Dahlia, his expression softening with concern. Are you hurt? No, she said, though her arms ached where they'd gripped her. I'm all right. You came back just in time. I shouldn't have left you alone, he said, his jaw tight with self-recrimination. I knew there were those in town who might try something like this. You can't be with me every moment, Dahlia pointed out gently, and I'm not entirely helpless. A small, proud smile curved her lips. I did manage to break Jed's nose, I think. Unexpected humor flickered in Vaughn's eyes. So I saw. Remind me never to get on the wrong side of you in a ledger book. The moment of levity passed quickly, however, as Vaughn's expression turned serious again. This won't be the last attempt. The reward is too tempting for some, and others simply don't want you here on principle. Perhaps I should leave, Dahlia suggested, though the thought of returning to a life on the run filled her with dread. I don't want to bring trouble to your door. No, Vaughn said firmly. Running isn't the answer. We need to clear your name. He hesitated, then added, I've been making inquiries, sending telegrams to contacts in other towns trying to learn more about Jasper Reynolds. Hope flared in Dahlia's chest. Have you discovered anything? Nothing concrete yet. But I have a friend in the U.S., Marshall's office, who's agreed to look into the matter discreetly. Vaughn's gaze held her steadily. I believe your story, Dahlia, and I intend to help you prove it. The sincerity in his voice, the unwavering support in his eyes, stirred something deep within Dahlia, something she'd been trying to ignore since the day he'd first offered her sanctuary. Standing there in the sheriff's office, the late afternoon sun slanting through the windows, Dahlia realized with a jolt that her feelings for Vaughn Zachary had grown beyond mere gratitude. It was a dangerous realization. She was still a woman accused, still vulnerable. And he was the law in Riverton, a man bound by duty and honor. Whatever was developing between them, this fragile, unnamed thing could only complicate an already precarious situation, so Dahlia did the only thing she could. She pushed the feelings aside, locked them away, and focused instead on the matter at hand, surviving and clearing her name. There would be time enough to examine her heart when she was no longer running from shadows. "Thank you," she said simply, hoping her voice didn't betray the tumult inside her. "For everything." Vaughn nodded, his expression unreadable. But as he turned away to hang up his hat, Dahlia could have sworn she saw something in his eyes that mirrored her own conflicted emotions, a spark of something deeper than duty or compassion. And in that moment, despite the danger that still surrounded her, Dahlia felt a flicker of hope that perhaps her future might hold more than just vindication. Perhaps it might also hold a chance at happiness. The attempted abduction marked a turning point. Vaughn, clearly shaken by how close he'd come to losing Dahlia to bounty hunters, became more protective, rarely leaving her alone in the office. But he also began teaching her to defend herself, showing her how to handle a small pistol, instructing her in basic techniques to escape if someone grabbed her. "Plant your feet," he said during one such lesson behind his house, where they wouldn't be observed by curious townsfolk. "Use your attacker's weight against them." Dahlia followed his instructions, pivoting sharply when he grasped her arm from behind, ducking under his hold and twisting away. The move worked better than either of them expected. Dahlia broke free, but the momentum sent them both off balance. Vaughn steadied her with a hand at her waist, the sudden closeness making both of them freeze. For a heartbeat, they stood like that, bodies nearly touching, Vaughn's hand warm through the fabric of her dress. Dahlia looked up into his blue eyes and saw something there that made her breath catch a heat, a longing that matched her own. Then Vaughn stepped back, clearing his throat. "Good," he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "You're learning quickly." These moments, brief, charged encounters where something unspoken passed between them, became increasingly common. A brush of hands as they both reached for the same document. A lingering glance across the dinner table. The gentle way Vaughn tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when it escaped its pins. Neither of them acknowledged it openly. There were too many complications, too many obstacles. But Dahlia found herself looking forward to their evenings together, to the quiet conversations by the fire where Vaughn would share stories of his childhood in Texas, his years riding with the Rangers before settling in Arizona, the sister who'd never quite adapted to frontier life. In turn, Dahlia told him about her own life. Her father, a schoolteacher who'd taught her to love books and numbers before consumption took him when she was 16. Her mother, who'd followed him to the grave a year later, leaving Dahlia alone to make her way in the world. The series of respectable positions she'd held before landing the job at the Silver Creek Bank. "And then Jasper Reynolds took an interest in you," Vaughn prompted one evening, his expression darkening at the mention of the man who had framed her. "Yes," Dahlia said, her fingers absently tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "He was charming, attentive. The son of the wealthiest man in town, courting the orphaned daughter of a schoolteacher. It seemed like something from a dime novel." She shook her head ruefully. "I should have known it was too good to be true." "You couldn't have known what he was planning," Vaughn said gently. "No, but I should have noticed the discrepancies in the accounts sooner. I was blinded by." She trailed off, embarrassed. "By affection," Vaughn finished for her. "There's no shame in that, Dahlia." She met his gaze, struck by the understanding in his eyes. "Perhaps. But I won't make the same mistake twice." Something flickered in Vaughn's expression, a shadow of hurt, quickly masked. "I suppose that's wise," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Trust should be earned, not given freely." "I do trust you," Dahlia said softly. "More than I've trusted anyone in a very long time." The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to voice. As August gave way to September, the heat of summer began to ease, and Dahlia found herself increasingly accepted if not entirely embraced by the people of Riverton. Her work bringing order to the town's finances had not gone unnoticed, and even Mayor Campbell grudgingly acknowledged that she had a certain usefulness. But not everyone was warming to her presence. Jed and his friends continued to watch her with hostile eyes, and there were others who crossed the street to avoid passing too close to the thief, as some still called her. It was during this time that the first significant break in her case came. Vaughn received a telegram from his Marshall friend that sent him into a flurry of activity. "Pack a bag," he told Dahlia one evening as he burst into the house, his expression more animated than she'd ever seen it. "Enough for several days." "What? Why?" Dahlia asked, alarmed by his urgency. "Because we're leaving for Tucson first thing tomorrow," Vaughn replied, already gathering his own belongings. "My friend Marshall Davis has found something, or rather, someone. A man named Thomas Ellis who worked at the Silver Creek Bank before you arrived. He was fired abruptly with no explanation." Davis tracked him to Tucson. Hope surged in Dahlia's chest. "You think he might know something about Jasper's embezzlement, it's possible?" Vaughn paused in his preparations to look at her, his expression serious. "I don't want to raise your hopes too high, Dahlia. This might lead nowhere." "But it's the first real lead we've had. Who will watch over Riverton while you're gone?" Dahlia asked, practical concerns momentarily overshadowing her excitement. "I've deputized Ben Morgan. He's young but reliable." Vaughn's lips quirked in a half-smile. "The town survived before I arrived. It can manage a few days without me." The journey to Tucson took 2 days by stage coach, 2 days of uncomfortable seats, dusty roads, and close quarters with other passengers who eyed Dahlia with varying degrees of curiosity when they learned she was traveling with the sheriff. Vaughn had introduced her simply as Miss Patterson, my assistant, offering no further explanation. Despite the discomfort, Dahlia found herself enjoying the journey. It was her first time traveling anywhere beyond the immediate vicinity of Silver Creek since the accusations, and there was a freedom in the motion, in the changing landscape passing outside the stage-coach windows. More than that, there was the constant presence of Vaughn beside her, solid and reassuring. In the confines of the stagecoach, they sat closer than they ever had before, their shoulders and knees occasionally touching as the vehicle swayed over rough terrain. Each point of contact sent warmth spreading through Dahlia, a warmth that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. They arrived in Tucson late in the afternoon of the second day, dusty and tired but eager to meet with Marshall Davis and Thomas Ellis. The Marshal had arranged rooms for them at a modest hotel, separate rooms, of course, with Dahlia's directly across the hall from Vaughn's. "Get some rest," Vaughn advised as they stood in the hallway between their rooms. "I'll meet with Davis tonight, and tomorrow we'll talk to Ellis together." "I want to come with you tonight," Dahlia protested. "This concerns me more than anyone." Vaughn hesitated, then nodded. "All right, give me an hour to clean up and we'll go together." Marshal James Davis proved to be a burly man with a graying beard and shrewd eyes that assessed Dahlia carefully when Vaughn introduced her. "So you're the young lady who's got half the territory in an uproar," he said, gesturing for them to sit in his cluttered office. "Vaughn here seems convinced of your innocence." "I am innocent," Dahlia said firmly, "and I'm hoping Mr. Ellis might help prove it." "Well, he's certainly eager to talk," Davis replied. "Been waiting for someone to listen to his story for months, from what I can tell. Says Reynolds ruined his reputation, made it impossible for him to find work in banking again." "Where is he now?" Vaughn asked. "Works as a clerk at a mercantile on the edge of town," Davis said. "Living in a boarding house nearby. I've arranged for you to meet him tomorrow morning at my office." "Figured it would be more private than the store." "What else can you tell us about him?" Vaughn pressed. Davis stroked his beard thoughtfully. Seems like a decent sort, bitter about what happened to him, but who wouldn't be? Claims Reynolds set him up when he started asking questions about account discrepancies. He glanced at Dahlia. Sound familiar? Very, she replied, her heart beating faster. This was the first real chance at vindication she'd had since fleeing Silver Creek. There's something else, Davis said, his expression turning more serious. Word is that Wilson, the bank owner you supposedly shot, regained consciousness about 2 weeks after you left town, and immediately after Reynolds moved up his wedding plans. Wedding plans, Dahlia repeated, confused. Jasper is got married, Davis corrected, to Emily Wilson, the bank owner's daughter. Dahlia felt as though the floor had dropped from beneath her. Emily Wilson, she whispered, the pieces suddenly fit together with horrible clarity. That's why he needed me gone. It wasn't just about covering up the embezzlement. He wanted to marry Emily all along for her father's money for the bank. And you were in the way, Vaughn concluded grimly. So was Ellis, apparently, Davis added, and maybe Wilson himself once he saw what was happening. Reynolds seems to eliminate anyone who threatens his plans. Then we need to be careful, Vaughn said, his hand unconsciously moving to rest protectively on Dahlia's shoulder. If Reynolds learns we're gathering evidence against him. Already thought of that, Davis assured him. As far as anyone knows, you're here on official business unrelated to the Patterson case, and I've made sure Ellis understands the need for discretion. As they left the marshal's office, Dahlia was quiet, processing everything she'd learned. Vaughn walked beside her, occasionally glancing at her with concern. Are you all right? He finally asked as they approached the hotel. I feel foolish, Dahlia admitted. I actually believed Jasper loved me when all along I was just an obstacle to be removed. There's no shame in believing someone's lies when they're skilled at telling them, Vaughn said gently. Reynolds sounds like a practiced manipulator. They paused outside their respective doors. Vaughn hesitated, then reached out to take Dahlia's hand. His touch was warm, comforting. Try to rest, he said softly. Tomorrow might bring the answers we've been looking for. Dahlia nodded, squeezing his hand before reluctantly letting go. Good night, Vaughn. Good night, Dahlia. Inside her room, Dahlia moved to the window, looking out at the Tucson night. For the first time since the accusations began, she felt a genuine hope that her name might be cleared. But mixed with that hope was a new uncertainty. If she was exonerated, what then? Would she return to Silver Creek to rebuild her life, stay in Riverton? And what of Vaughn, the man who had believed in her when no one else would, who had become more important to her than she cared to admit? These questions followed her into sleep, where her dreams were a confused jumble of ledger books, wanted posters, and Vaughn's blue eyes looking at her with an emotion she dared not name. Thomas Ellis was a thin, nervous man with spectacles that kept slipping down his nose and fingers perpetually stained with ink. He sat across from Dahlia and Vaughn in Marshal Davis's office, clutching a leather portfolio to his chest like a shield. I never thought anyone would believe me, he said, his voice quavering slightly. Not after the way Reynolds discredited me. Tell us what happened, Mr. Ellis, Vaughn prompted gently. Ellis pushed his spectacles back up and took a deep breath. I worked at the Silver Creek Bank for 8 years. I was head bookkeeper until Reynolds joined the bank as assistant manager. His expression soured. Old man Wilson brought him in as a favor to his father. Everyone knew that. Reynolds didn't know the first thing about banking when he started. But he learned quickly, Dahlia guessed. Ellis nodded. Too quickly and in all the wrong ways. I noticed small discrepancies at first, amounts that didn't match, withdrawals with no corresponding records. When I brought them to Reynolds' attention, he thanked me, said he'd look into it. He laughed bitterly. Next thing I knew, I was being accused of the very embezzlement I'd uncovered. Reynolds had forged my signature on documents, altered ledgers to implicate me. The story was so similar to Dahlia's own that she felt a chill run down her spine. What did Mr. Wilson say? He believed Reynolds, of course. Why wouldn't he? Reynolds was courting his daughter by then, coming to Sunday dinner at the Wilson house, making himself indispensable. Ellis's hands tightened on the portfolio. I was fired, my reputation ruined. No bank would hire me after that. I had to leave Silver Creek, start over. And then Dahlia took your position, Vaughn said, the pieces falling into place. Yes, I heard about it later that Reynolds had hired a young woman as the new bookkeeper. I tried to warn her. Ellis looked at Dahlia apologetically. I sent a letter to the bank, addressed to head bookkeeper. I suppose Reynolds intercepted it. He never mentioned any letter, Dahlia confirmed, her mind racing with the implications. Mr. Ellis, do you have any proof of what Reynolds did, anything that might clear both our names? Ellis hesitated, then slowly opened the portfolio he'd been clutching. I kept copies of some of the original ledger entries before Reynolds altered them, and notes about the discrepancies I found. He spread several papers on the desk. I don't know if it's enough, but… Dahlia leaned forward eagerly, examining the documents with a practiced eye. These dates match when I found similar discrepancies, she said excitedly. And look, this withdrawal for $800 on March 12th. There's no corresponding deposit anywhere in the regular accounts. Vaughn studied the papers intently. Could Reynolds have been moving the money somewhere else? A private account, perhaps? Ellis nodded vigorously. That's what I suspected. There's a bank in Phoenix where he might have been transferring the funds. I couldn't prove it, but the timing of his trips there always coincided with large discrepancies in our accounts. For the next hour, they pored over Ellis's documents, comparing notes, building a picture of Reynolds's systematic theft from the bank. It wasn't conclusive proof, but it was compelling evidence that both Ellis and Dahlia had been framed for discovering Reynolds's crimes. What about the shooting? Vaughn asked finally. Dahlia is accused of shooting Wilson when he supposedly discovered her theft. Ellis frowned. I heard about that. It happened after I left town, of course, but… He hesitated. It never made sense to me. If Wilson was investigating missing funds, he would have gone to Reynolds first as the bank manager, and Reynolds would have had far more to lose if Wilson uncovered the truth. So you think Reynolds shot Wilson to silence him, then blamed me, Dahlia said, the horror of it settling in her stomach like a stone. It fits the pattern, Ellis agreed somberly. And if Wilson regained consciousness, as I've heard… He trailed off, looking troubled. Then Reynolds might have silenced him permanently, Vaughn finished grimly. Or at least convinced him of a false version of events. Marshal Davis, who had been quietly observing from the corner, spoke up. I can send a telegram to Silver Creek, inquire about Wilson's condition. Discreetly, of course. Please do, Vaughn said. And in the meantime, Mr. Ellis, would you be willing to sign a sworn statement about what you've told us today? Ellis hesitated only briefly before nodding. Yes, it's time the truth came out, whatever the cost. As they left the marshal's office later that morning, Dahlia felt lighter than she had in months. They didn't yet have enough evidence to fully clear her name, but they had a start and, more importantly, confirmation that she wasn't alone in being victimized by Jasper Reynolds. What happens now? She asked Vaughn as they walked back toward the hotel. We build our case, he replied. Ellis's testimony, your own account, the document copies. It might be enough to convince a judge to look into the matter formally. Dahlia hesitated, then voiced the question that had been troubling her. And if Wilson is dead? If Reynolds has made sure there are no witnesses to contradict his version of events? Vaughn's expression was solemn. Then we have a more difficult road ahead, but I promise you, Dahlia, I won't stop until your name is cleared. He took her hand, right there on the street, seemingly unconcerned about who might see. You've endured too much to give up now. The earnestness in his voice, the warmth of his hand around hers, made Dahlia's heart swell with an emotion she could no longer deny. In that moment, standing on a Tucson street with the man who had become her champion, Dahlia Patterson admitted to herself what she had been trying to ignore for weeks: she was falling in love with Vaughn Zachary. And based on the way he was looking at her, with a tenderness that went far beyond professional duty, she dared to hope he might feel the same. Their return journey to Riverton was marked by a new energy, a sense of purpose that hadn't existed before. They had Ellis's sworn statement, copies of his documents, and a promise from Marshal Davis to continue investigating discreetly. It wasn't complete vindication, but it was a beginning. More than that. There was a shift in their relationship, subtle but unmistakable. The barriers of caution that had kept them at a careful distance seemed to be dissolving, replaced by a quiet intimacy that manifested in small ways. Vaughn's hand at the small of her back as he helped her into the stagecoach. The way Dahlia leaned against his shoulder when tiredness overcame her. The long conversations that flowed more freely now, punctuated by shared smiles and lingering glances. They arrived back in Riverton to find the town largely unchanged, though Deputy Morgan reported that there had been increased talk about Dahlia in their absence, some speculating that she had fled or that Vaughn had finally turned her in to authorities elsewhere. "Let them talk," Vaughn said dismissively. "We know the truth, and soon enough so will everyone else." That evening, as they sat together in Vaughn's small house, the familiar comfort of their routine took on new significance. Dahlia had prepared a simple meal and they ate by lamplight, discussing their next steps in building her case. "I've been thinking," Vaughn said as they cleared the dishes, "about what happens when your name is cleared." Dahlia paused, a plate in her hand. "What do you mean? Will you return to Silver Creek, try to rebuild your life there?" His tone was carefully neutral, but Dahlia sensed the weight behind the question. "I've thought about that too," she admitted, "but I don't think I could go back. Too many memories, too much pain." She set down the plate and turned to face him fully. "Besides, I've found something here in Riverton that I never had in Silver Creek." "And what's that?" Vaughn asked softly, moving closer to her. Dahlia's heart pounded in her chest as she gathered her courage. "A place where I belong. People who believe in me." She took a deep breath. "Someone who sees me for who I really am." Vaughn's blue eyes darkened with emotion. "Dahlia," he said, his voice rough, "these past weeks, having you here, it's changed everything." He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. Dahlia leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly at the tenderness of the gesture. "I know it's complicated," Vaughn continued. "Your situation, my position as sheriff, but I can't pretend anymore that what I feel for you is just concern or duty." "And what do you feel?" Dahlia whispered, needing to hear the words. Instead of answering directly, Vaughn lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. But when Dahlia responded, her hands moving to his shoulders, the kiss deepened into something more urgent, more honest, an expression of feelings that had been building between them for weeks. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. "I think I've been falling in love with you since the day you stood in my office and told me your story," he confessed. "Your courage, your determination, your kindness despite everything you've endured. How could I not?" Joy bloomed in Dahlia's chest, bright and powerful. "I love you too," she said, the words coming easily now that the barrier between them had finally fallen. "I think I have for some time, but I was afraid of complicating things, afraid of being hurt again." "I would never hurt you," Vaughn promised, his hands gentle as they framed her face. "In my arms, you'll only know honor and love, Dahlia. That's my vow to you." It was the same promise he'd made that first day, though the meaning had deepened, transformed by everything they'd experienced together. And as he kissed her again, Dahlia believed him with her whole heart. The next few weeks brought both progress and setbacks. Marshal Davis's inquiries revealed that Jonathan Wilson was indeed still alive, though he remained at his home under the care of doctors, rarely seen in public. More troubling was the news that Jasper Reynolds had been named vice president of the bank, his position in Silver Creek society more secure than ever through his marriage to Emily Wilson. "He's almost untouchable now," Dahlia said worriedly as she and Vaughn discussed the latest telegram from Marshal Davis. "No one in Silver Creek will want to believe ill of him." "Perhaps," Vaughn acknowledged, "but that doesn't mean we give up." Davis has a contact at the bank in Phoenix where we suspect Reynolds has been hiding the embezzled funds. If we can trace the money, prove it came from the Silver Creek Bank. Their professional partnership continued alongside their deepening personal relationship. By day, they worked together in the sheriff's office, building their case piece by meticulous piece. By night, they explored this new dimension between them, shared meals giving way to shared confidences, tender kisses, and promises for a future they were both beginning to envision more clearly. The people of Riverton noticed the change. Some, like young Deputy Morgan, seemed pleased by the development. Others, like Mayor Campbell and his wife, made their disapproval clear through pointed comments and cold stares. But increasingly, the town was coming to accept Dahlia as one of their own, her diligent work and quiet dignity winning over even some of her former critics. It was early October when the breakthrough finally came. A telegram arrived from Marshal Davis with news that changed everything. Jonathan Wilson had requested a meeting with the marshal, expressing doubts about the official account of the shooting and Dahlia's alleged crimes. "He wants to talk to you," Vaughn told Dahlia, excitement evident in his voice as he read the telegram. "Wilson says he remembers more about the day of the shooting than he initially let on. He's willing to meet with us in Tucson, away from Reynolds's influence." Hope surged in Dahlia's chest. "When?" "Next week. Davis has arranged everything." Vaughn took her hands in his. "This could be it, Dahlia, the testimony we need to clear your name completely." The journey to Tucson this time was filled with a nervous energy that had both of them on edge. So much depended on what Jonathan Wilson would say, on whether his memories of that fateful day would confirm what they already suspected, that Jasper Reynolds was the true criminal, and Dahlia merely his convenient scapegoat. They arrived to find Wilson already installed at a small hotel on the outskirts of town, a location chosen for its discretion. He was a frail man now, his once robust frame withered by his brush with death. But his eyes were sharp and alert as he greeted them in the hotel's private dining room. "Miss Patterson," he said, extending a trembling hand, "I've thought of you often these past months." "Mr. Wilson," Dahlia replied, emotion making her voice unsteady. "I can't tell you what it means to me that you agreed to this meeting." The elderly banker gestured for them to sit. "I owe you an apology, my dear, a profound one. I've allowed a grave injustice to continue far too long." "You remember what happened the day you were shot?" Vaughn asked directly. Wilson nodded, his expression somber. "Not all of it. The doctors say that's common with traumatic injuries." "But enough." He took a sip of water, collecting his thoughts. "I had begun to notice discrepancies in the bank's accounts, small at first, then larger. I suspected internal theft but wasn't sure who was responsible." Dahlia leaned forward, hardly daring to breathe as Wilson continued. "I decided to conduct a private audit. Started going through the books myself after hours. That's when I found evidence that funds were being systematically diverted." He glanced at Dahlia apologetically. "Your signature was on some of the documents, which initially made me suspect you. But then I found others with alterations that didn't match your handwriting." "Forgeries," Dahlia supplied. "Jasper had access to my signature. He could easily have copied it." Wilson nodded. "I confronted him that afternoon. Told him I had evidence of his theft and that I was going to the authorities." His hand trembled as he reached again for his water glass. He laughed, said I was a fool, that no one would believe me over him, that he would soon be family and the bank would eventually be his anyway through my daughter. The old man's eyes clouded with pain. "I told him I would never allow him to marry Emily, not now that I knew what he was." That's when he pulled out the gun. "I remember being shocked. I didn't even know he carried a weapon. There was a struggle, the gun went off. And then," Vaughn prompted gently, "it's hazy after that," Wilson admitted. "I remember falling, pain, voices, someone screaming." He looked at Dahlia. "You were there. You'd come into the office to deliver some paperwork, I think." Dahlia nodded, the horrible memory flooding back. I heard the gunshot from the main room. When I ran in, you were on the floor bleeding. Jasper was standing over you with the gun. He turned to me and she swallowed hard. And he said, "Look what you've done, Dahlia." "He framed you right there," Vaughn said grimly, "with the perfect witness, a man too near death to contradict him." "Except I didn't die," Wilson continued. "I woke up weeks later to find that Dahlia had fled, branded a thief and attempted murderer, and Jasper was being hailed as a hero for discovering the embezzlement. And he was engaged to my daughter." Bitterness tinged his voice. "I knew the truth, but I was weak, still recovering. And Jasper made it clear what would happen if I contradicted the official story." "He threatened you?" Vaughn asked, his jaw tightening. "Not directly, but he reminded me how fragile my health was, how easily accidents could happen. And he mentioned how devastated Emily would be to lose her father so soon after nearly losing him once." Wilson's gaze dropped to his hands. "I was a coward. I told myself I was protecting my daughter, but in truth I was protecting myself. At your expense, Miss Patterson." "What changed?" Dahlia asked softly. "Why come forward now?" "Emily," Wilson said simply. "She's miserable in her marriage. Jasper shows his true colors more each day, controlling, cold, interested only in the bank and the status his marriage has brought him." His eyes met Dahlia's, filled with remorse. "And I could no longer live with what I'd allowed to happen to you. An innocent young woman, her life destroyed because I lacked the courage to speak the truth." "Will you make a formal statement?" Vaughn asked. "Sign an affidavit about what really happened?" "I'll do more than that," Wilson replied with surprising firmness. "I intend to return to Silver Creek and publicly clear Miss Patterson's name, to bring charges against Jasper Reynolds for embezzlement and attempted murder." He looked between them determinedly. It's time justice was served, whatever the personal cost. As they left the meeting, Dahlia felt light-headed with relief and disbelief. After months of being branded a criminal, of living in the shadow of accusations, the truth was finally coming to light. Her name would be cleared. Her honor restored. "It's really happening," she said as they walked back to their hotel, Vaughn's arm supportive around her waist. "After all this time, you never lost faith," Vaughn said, pride evident in his voice, "even when it seemed hopeless." Dahlia stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "I had help," she said softly, reaching up to touch his face. "Someone who believed in me when no one else would." Vaughn caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I believed in you from the start," he said. "And I've never been so glad to be proven right." That night, in the privacy of Dahlia's hotel room, they allowed themselves to truly celebrate for the first time not just the imminent clearing of her name, but the future that now stretched before them. A future they could build together without the shadow of false accusations hanging over them. "What happens next?" Dahlia asked as they sat together by the window, looking out at the stars over Tucson. "After Wilson makes his statement, after my name is cleared," Vaughn took her hand, his expression serious but tender. "That depends on you, on what you want." "I want to stay in Riverton," Dahlia said without hesitation. "It's become home to me, the place where I found myself again." She looked up at him, her heart in her eyes. "The place where I found you." The smile that spread across Vaughn's face was like sunrise breaking over the desert. "I was hoping you'd say that," he said, reaching into his pocket, "because I've been carrying this around for a week, waiting for the right moment." He withdrew a small ring, a simple gold band with a modest diamond that caught the lamplight. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I had it sent from my sister in Philadelphia." Dahlia's breath caught as Vaughn slid from his chair to one knee before her. "Dahlia Patterson," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "you came into my life branded as a thief, but you stole my heart fair and square." His blue eyes held hers, filled with love and certainty. "I promised you once that in my arms you would only know honor. Now I'm asking if you'll let me keep that promise for the rest of our lives. Will you marry me?" Tears of joy blurred Dahlia's vision as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, with all my heart." As Vaughn slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their promise, Dahlia marveled at the journey that had brought her here from accused criminal to beloved fiancé, from desperate fugitive to a woman with a future full of hope. The coming weeks would bring challenges as Wilson's statement became public, as the truth about Jasper Reynolds was revealed, as the legal process of formally clearing her name proceeded. But whatever lay ahead, she would face it with Vaughn beside her, his love and faith a shield against any storm. In his arms, she had indeed found honor. But she had found so much more: a home, a future, and a love that had transformed her greatest despair into her greatest joy. The events that followed unfolded with a swiftness that left Dahlia breathless. Jonathan Wilson was true to his word, returning to Silver Creek with Marshal Davis to make a formal statement about the shooting and Jasper Reynolds's crimes. The news spread like wildfire throughout the territory, the respected banker accusing his own son-in-law of embezzlement and attempted murder, clearing the name of the woman who had been branded a thief and fugitive for months. Jasper Reynolds was arrested, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him as evidence mounted. The bank in Phoenix confirmed suspicious deposits matching the missing funds from Silver Creek Bank. Thomas Ellis came forward with his testimony. And other bank employees, freed from fear of Reynolds's influence, admitted to noticing discrepancies they had been too afraid to report. For Dahlia, watching these developments from Riverton, it was like witnessing a storm from a safe harbor. The vindication was sweet, but it was the future that occupied her thoughts, now her future with Vaughn in the town that had become her home. "The wanted posters have been officially recalled," Vaughn told her one evening in late October, waving a telegram. "And there's more. Wilson has offered you a formal apology and compensation for the damage to your reputation. He's also offered you your job back if you want it." Dahlia looked up from the ledger she was reviewing at the sheriff's office desk. "I already have a job," she said with a smile, "one I'm quite fond of." "True," Vaughn agreed, coming to perch on the edge of her desk. "But soon you'll have another title as well, Mrs. Zachary." The words sent a thrill through Dahlia. Their engagement had been announced to the town the previous Sunday to mixed reactions. Many had offered genuine congratulations, Deputy Morgan leading the way with enthusiastic well wishes. Even Mayor Campbell had grudgingly acknowledged that Dahlia had proven herself a respectable addition to Riverton after all. Others remained skeptical, unable to fully let go of their initial impression of her as a criminal. But those voices were increasingly in the minority as Dahlia's innocence became widely known and her position in the community solidified. "Speaking of which," Vaughn continued, "Reverend Tate asked when we're planning the wedding. He mentioned the church is available any Sunday in November." "November," Dahlia repeated, a smile spreading across her face. "That seems perfect, a new beginning as winter approaches." She reached for his hand. "Though I don't need a ceremony to know that my life is already bound to yours," Vaughn lifted her hand to his lips. "Nevertheless, I intend to make you my wife properly with the whole town as witness." His blue eyes twinkled. "Besides, Mrs. Morgan has already started planning the wedding dinner. I don't think we could stop her if we tried." The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a happy blur. Dahlia found herself embraced by the women of Riverton in a way she hadn't been before, invited to sewing circles, included in afternoon teas, consulted on town matters as though she had always been one of them. Her past as an accused criminal seemed to fade in importance as her future, as the sheriff's wife took precedence. Emily Wilson Reynolds appeared unexpectedly in Riverton 2 weeks before the wedding, having left her husband following his arrest. She sought out Dahlia, offering a tearful apology for her role in perpetuating the false accusations. "I should have known," Emily said, her face pale and drawn. "There were signs. The way he changed after we were married, how cold he became once he had secured his position at the bank." She twisted her hands in her lap. Father tried to warn me after he recovered enough to speak privately with me, but I was too proud, too certain I knew better. You're not responsible for Jasper's actions, Dahlia assured her, moved by the young woman's evident distress. Perhaps not, Emily acknowledged, but I am responsible for my own, and I failed to stand up for the truth. She hesitated, then added, I've come to ask if you could ever forgive me. Dahlia thought of her own journey, the pain of false accusations, but also the unexpected joy that had come from starting anew in Riverton. There's nothing to forgive, she said sincerely. We were both deceived by Jasper, and now we're both free of him. Emily stayed for 3 days, finding an unexpected friendship with Dahlia that helped heal some of the wounds inflicted by Jasper's betrayal. When she left to return to her father's house in Silver Creek, it was with plans to visit again for the wedding. It's strange, Dahlia remarked to Vaughn after seeing Emily off on the stagecoach. A month ago, I would have thought it impossible to find common ground with Jasper's wife, but now you see that she was as much his victim as you were, Vaughn finished for her. In a different way, perhaps, but still damaged by his deceptions. Dahlia nodded, leaning into the comfort of his arm around her shoulders. It makes me realize how fortunate I am. Despite everything I've endured, I found something beautiful on the other side. She looked up at him with love. I found you. Their wedding day dawned clear and crisp, a perfect November Sunday. The small church in Riverton was filled to capacity not just with townspeople, but with visitors from neighboring settlements, Marshall Davis from Tucson, Thomas Ellis, and even Jonathan and Emily Wilson, who had traveled from Silver Creek for the occasion. Dahlia wore a gown of ivory satin that the women of Riverton had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs that Mrs. Morgan had contributed from her own wedding dress. Her hair was arranged with orange blossoms sent by Vaughn's sister Rebecca, who had been unable to travel from Philadelphia, but had written warmly of her joy at gaining a new sister. When Dahlia entered the church on Jonathan Wilson's arm, he had asked for the honor of giving her away. A gesture of atonement that she had graciously accepted, her eyes immediately found Vaughn waiting at the altar. He stood tall and handsome in his best suit, his face lighting up with love and pride as he watched her approach. Dearly beloved, Reverend Tate began as Dahlia took her place beside Vaughn, their hands joined before the congregation. We are gathered here today to witness the union of two souls who have found in each other a most remarkable love, a love forged in adversity, strengthened by trials and proven true by the tests of time and circumstance. The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. Dahlia and Vaughn exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises that acknowledged their unique journey and the strength they had found in each other. Dahlia, Vaughn said, his voice steady and sure, when you came to Riverton, you carried burdens no one should have to bear alone. In offering you sanctuary, I found my own heart's home. I vow to stand beside you in all things, to honor and cherish you all the days of my life, to be your shelter and your strength as you have been mine. Tears glistened in Dahlia's eyes as she spoke her own vows. Vaughn, you believed in me when belief seemed foolish. You offered me honor when others offered only suspicion. In your arms, I have found not just safety but belonging. I vow to love you faithfully, to support you steadfastly, and to walk beside you through whatever joys and challenges life brings our way. When Reverend Tate pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was both a culmination and a beginning, the end of their separate journeys, and the start of a shared path forward. The celebration that followed at the town hall was joyous and heartfelt. Tables groaned with food contributed by nearly every household in Riverton. Music from a hastily assembled band of local talents filled the air, and everywhere there were smiles and good wishes for the sheriff and his bride. You've come a long way from that day I found you about to be lynched in the street, Marshall Davis observed wryly as he offered his congratulations. Though I admit, when Vaughn first wrote to me about investigating your case, I thought he might be letting his heart overrule his head. And now, Dahlia asked, glancing across the room to where Vaughn was accepting congratulatory handshakes from a group of ranchers. Now I think his heart knew what it was doing all along, the marshal replied with a smile. As evening fell and the celebration continued, Dahlia found herself standing with Vaughn at the edge of the dance floor, watching the townspeople who had become her community. Deputy Morgan was teaching Emily Wilson a lively reel, both of them laughing. Jonathan Wilson sat with Mayor Campbell, deep in conversation. Mrs. Morgan was distributing slices of wedding cake with proud efficiency. "Happy?" Vaughn asked softly, his arm around her waist. Dahlia leaned her head against his shoulder. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "A few months ago I was running for my life with no hope and no future. Now," she looked up at him, her heart full. "Now I have everything I could ever want, not quite everything," Vaughn said with a mysterious smile. "I have one more wedding gift for you." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document, pressing it into her hands. "This came yesterday. I wanted to save it for today." Dahlia unfolded the paper, her eyes widening as she read. "A deed." "To the old Miller place just outside town," Vaughn confirmed. 3 acres, a small house that needs some work but sound. Room to grow." His eyes held a question, a hope for the future they'd only begun to discuss. "Our home," Dahlia whispered, understanding the gift's true significance. "A place for our family. For now, it's just us," Vaughn said, his hand gentle on her waist. "But someday, perhaps." "Someday soon," Dahlia agreed, her smile radiant as she imagined the children they might have, the life they would build together on that small piece of land outside Riverton. As the night deepened and stars appeared over the small frontier town, Sheriff Vaughn Zachary led his bride in one final dance, holding her close as the music slowed and other couples joined them on the floor. "I love you, Mrs. Zachary," he murmured against her hair. "And I love you," Dahlia replied, her heart so full it seemed impossible it could be contained within her chest. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else would, for offering me honor when others saw only guilt." "I saw you," Vaughn said simply, "the real you. And I'll spend the rest of my life grateful that you found your way to Riverton, to me." As they swayed together beneath the paper lanterns strung across the town hall ceiling, surrounded by the community that had become their family, Dahlia reflected on the strange and winding path that had led her here. She had arrived in Riverton branded as a thief, desperate and alone. She was leaving the celebration as Dahlia Zachary, beloved wife, respected member of the community, her name and honor restored. It wasn't the life she had imagined for herself when she'd accepted a position at the Silver Creek Bank all those months ago. It was something far better, far richer, a life built on truth and trust, on love that had been tested and proven in the crucible of adversity. In Vaughn's arms, she had indeed found honor. But she had also found a home, a future, and a love that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. And as they stepped out of the town hall into the cool November night, stars blazing overhead, Dahlia knew with perfect certainty that the best chapters of their story were yet to be written. 5 years passed, transforming the small house outside Riverton into a true home. Vaughn and Dahlia had worked side by side to repair the roof, build new furniture, plant a garden that now flourished with vegetables and flowers. The 3 acres that had once been overgrown were now well tended, with a small orchard of apple and peach trees, a chicken coop, and a sturdy corral for their horses. But the most precious addition to their home came a year after their wedding, their son, Jonathan Thomas Zachary, named for the 2 men who had helped clear Dahlia's name. At 4 years old, Johnny was a miniature version of his father, with the same dark hair and startling blue eyes, but with Dahlia's quiet thoughtfulness and love of books. The spring after Johnny's birth had brought another change as well. Vaughn had stepped down as sheriff, passing the badge to Ben Morgan, who had proven himself more than capable. Instead, Vaughn had accepted a position as circuit judge for the territory, a role that utilized his sense of justice and knowledge of the law, while allowing him more time at home with his growing family. Dahlia continued to manage Riverton's accounts, working from home now, with Johnny playing nearby as she balanced ledgers and prepared reports. The skills that had once made her a target for Jasper Reynolds's schemes now provided a comfortable supplement to Vaughn's income as judge. On this particular evening in November 1883, Dahlia stood on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Their 5th wedding anniversary had just passed, celebrated with a small gathering of friends the Morgans, Marshall Davis, now retired, and Emily Wilson, who had remarried the previous year to a kind rancher from outside Tucson. Dahlia's hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the movements of their second child due to arrive just after Christmas. Johnny sat on the porch steps, carefully drawing in a small notebook, his small face screwed up in concentration. The sound of hoofbeats announced Vaughn's return from a week-long circuit of hearings in outlying settlements. Dahlia smiled as she saw him approach, still as handsome to her as the day they'd met, though now with more silver threading through his dark hair. "Papa." Johnny cried, abandoning his drawing to race down the path toward his father. Vaughn dismounted just in time to catch his son, swinging him up into his arms with a laugh. "There's my boy. Have you been taking care of your mama while I was gone?" "Yes, sir," Johnny replied solemnly. "I helped with the chickens and read stories to the baby." "Did you now?" Vaughn asked, carrying Johnny as he approached the porch. His eyes met Dahlia's over their son's head, filled with love and happiness at being home. "And how is your mama feeling?" "Better now that you're home," Dahlia replied, stepping into his free arm for a kiss. "We've missed you." That evening, after Johnny was tucked into bed with a story about brave sheriffs and the ladies who loved them, Dahlia and Vaughn sat together on the porch, enjoying the cool night air and the brilliance of the stars overhead. "I received an interesting letter while I was in Tucson," Vaughn said, his arm around Dahlia's shoulders, "from the warden at Yuma Territorial Prison." Dahlia tensed slightly. Jasper Reynolds had been sentenced to 15 years for his crimes: embezzlement, attempted murder, fraud. They rarely spoke of him now, but his shadow had never completely vanished from their lives. "What did it say?" she asked. "Reynolds died," Vaughn said simply. "Fever swept through the prison. He was one of several who didn't survive." Dahlia was quiet for a long moment, processing the news. Once, she had hated Jasper with an intensity that frightened her, hated him for what he'd done to her, for the life he'd nearly stolen. But time and happiness had softened those feelings into something more like pity. "I hope he found peace in the end," she finally said, "or at least acceptance." Vaughn pressed a kiss to her temple. "That's one of the things I love most about you," he murmured. "Your capacity for forgiveness, for seeing the best in people, even those who have wronged you." "I learned that from you," Dahlia replied, leaning into his embrace. "You saw the good in me when everyone else saw only suspicion and guilt." "I saw the truth," Vaughn corrected gently, "just as you've always seen it in others." They sat in comfortable silence for a time, listening to the night sounds of the desert coyotes calling in the distance, the soft rustling of wind through the cottonwood trees. "You ever regret it?" Dahlia asked suddenly. "Taking a chance on me that day? You could have had a much simpler life if you'd just let me move on." Vaughn turned to face her fully, his hands cradling her face with infinite tenderness. "Dahlia Zachary," he said, his voice low and fervent, "not a day goes by that I don't thank God you stumbled into Riverton. You and Johnny and this little one on the way are the best things that have ever happened to me." Dahlia's eyes filled with happy tears as she covered his hands with her own. "When I ran from Silver Creek, I thought my life was over," she admitted. "I never imagined I could find such happiness, such love. In my arms, you'll only know honor." Vaughn quoted his own words from that first day, now a cherished part of their shared history. "But you've given me so much more than I ever promised you. A home. A family." A purpose greater than just upholding the law. Inside the house, Johnny called out sleepily, and they both rose to check on him. As they stood together in their son's doorway, watching his peaceful slumber, Dahlia felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. The path that had led her here had been fraught with danger and despair. She had been branded a thief, her reputation in tatters, her future seemingly destroyed. But that very path had led her to Vaughn, to Riverton, to this life that surpassed anything she could have dreamed. As their second child stirred within her, as Johnny sighed contentedly in his sleep, as Vaughn's arm tightened protectively around her waist, Dahlia knew with absolute certainty that every hardship had been worth it for this moment, this family, this love. She had been branded a thief, but what she had found in the arms of her cowboy sheriff was beyond price a love that had restored her honor and given her a life richer than she had ever imagined possible.